Do you ever wonder why some barbecue has that perfect, smoky, beautiful bark on the outside while others look just kind of dry? If you want that savory, charcoal-looking crust on the outside of your barbecue, you're in the right spot. You know, I remember the first brisket I made kind of looked like a giant, red, overcooked hunk of beef. Because really, that's what it was, but no longer. Let's get into it with our first and most important tip, when to wrap. Of all the barbecue legends out there, I would say one of the greatest is easily Meathead Goldwyn. He describes bark as the deep, dark, rich, sweet, chewy, crusty, jerky-like rind, suffused with incredible complex flavor. Now there's really two main factors that create this delicious crust that we're all after: smoke and time, which is probably also the name of your trendy local barbecue joint. I'll dive into the specifics in just a minute, but to put it extremely simply, if the main thing that you're after is more bark, you need more smoke and more time. Let me explain. So most barbecue recipes have a wrapping stage. This is usually called the Texas crunch, and it's primarily used to speed up the cooking process since barbecue can take so long. So let's take a brisket for example. If you look up most recipes online, it will tell you to wrap your briskets around 165 internal degrees. But in my experience, this method of wrapping at 165 simply doesn't give the meat enough time to absorb that smoke and turn into that lump of coal that we're looking for. What you save and make up for in time by wrapping, you lose in bark production. So what I would do is prepare to start cooking a few hours earlier than you normally would. Now, yes, I know this means I'm asking you to wake up earlier, but I think we all know deep down that the path to better barbecue is a path of personal sacrifice. Instead of wrapping at a certain temperature, you're gonna keep an eye on your brisket or pork butt, and you're gonna wrap it when the bark looks right to you. For me, this is often around 175 or even 185, which again takes a lot longer since you're not using that Texas crush method. Okay, tip number 2, salt your meat in advance and let it sit uncovered in the fridge overnight. This is called dry brining, and it can actually be a game changer for your barbecue. I'm sure you've heard of wet brining. You might have done that for maybe Thanksgiving turkey or something, when you soak it overnight in salt and spices. It's amazing, and when you salt the meat in advance, it actually draws out moisture from the surface of the meat, which is then reabsorbed along back with the salt. This process leaves the surface slightly drier, and the salt sinks down into the meat, seasoning and penetrating it all the way through, rather than just being seasoned on the outside. It's also super easy. Just take out your protein the night before, rinse it off, and then pat it dry, and place it on a baking rack to maximize airflow around the meat. And then just season it with kosher salt or sea salt. If you try using table salt, this is gonna be way too salty, and kosher salt is just a lot more forgiving. Then just leave it in the fridge overnight and smoke it in the morning. After it's dry brined, it will have something called a pellicle on the outside, which is a slightly tacky, dry surface layer that develops when the proteins on the meat's surface react to air exposure. You don't really need to worry about the specifics, but it does help create this amazing bark when you're smoking the meat. Just make sure it's not sitting next to any strong smelling foods in your fridge so that it doesn't take on or absorb any other weird flavors. And when you're ready to cook, pat it dry and then season it with your other spices like black pepper or garlic, whatever you want. Just don't add a barbecue rub at this stage since you already pre-salted the meat. But in the end, the drier surface on the meat allows for a more efficient Maillard reaction and caramelization during cooking, which will get you a better bark. Tip number 3, get the right amount of moisture in your smoker. When it comes to barbecue, getting the right amount of humidity in the smoker can be kind of a learning process. I'm still figuring this out myself. But for example, when it comes to something like pork butt, you wanna make sure you don't spritz it too early on in the process. You wanna give that bark around 3 to 4 hours to really set before you start spritzing it and adding moisture into the mix. I've also seen some people who just douse the meat when it comes time to spritz, and really all that's gonna do is slow down your cooking process. It will cool off the meat. It's gonna make it harder for the fat to render, and it creates a steamy environment that prevents bark from forming. Now, you also don't want no moisture. That's just gonna cause the surface to seriously dry out and give you a leathery, tough bark. So what I do is have a water pan inside my smoker, always keeping it about halfway full. And when I spritz the meat, I try and only spritz the actual meat and avoid the fat. I want that fat to keep rendering down, keep getting soft, Before we get to tip number 4, I just want to say I definitely learned a ton while researching for this video. And if you feel like you've learned anything so far, anything new, maybe drop a comment down below, let me know. Or hey, even subscribe, do it for snips. The 4th tip, you're gonna want to wrap in butcher paper and not in foil. Foil is awesome and it really does speed up the process, especially if you're in a hurry, but it's going to completely steam the meat and much of that delicious bark is going to start rubbing and sliding off. So I definitely lean towards butcher paper, which is more breathable, it's less rough on the meat, and it's gonna allow it to continue absorbing some smoke all the way through the finish line. This butcher paper in specific from Reynolds is my personal favorite because there's a built-in sliding blade. Finally, I don't know why it took someone so long to add this feature, but it's much welcome. I usually grab these at Home Depot, but I'll link them down below as well. Okay, our 5th and final tip, drum roll. Just use a darker barbecue rub. Is this cheating? Maybe, kind of. But the truth is that as people, we eat with our eyes. So if something looks better, it's going to taste better too. So you could either use tons of black pepper, which is what I do on my pork butts. But when it comes to beef, I always use the same dry rub, which is called the Grim Reaper from How Low Can You Slow Barbecue. It's similar to the hardcore carnivore black rub, but I personally like this one better. It has those classic spices like garlic and onion, and plenty of salt and pepper, as well as some activated charcoal to give your meats a really dark, firm bark on the outside. It also makes an amazing crust if you're searing steaks, or even something like a rack of lamb. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks, friends. Peace.